Hi, everyone. Welcome back to FOFS in Conversation. Today, we are joined by Carol Nguyen, Director of No Crying at the Dinner Table. Carol, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Can't complain. One thing I'd like to ask is an inquiry about essentially your filmmaking career and your oscillation between hybrid documentary and fiction work. And my specific interest is essentially that the scrutiny that as a filmmaker you look at once the film is complete and moving on to your next project, which could be whatever genre that you tackle. What is it that you take specifically from these different forms of filmmaking that you can bring to your next work?
I'd say my entrance into filmmaking is pretty unique. I never thought that I wanted to be a filmmaker until I entered in a film program in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I really learned about the power of storytelling. And not having growing up wanting to be a director or having any inkling of how a camera even works, I really built my storytelling desires off of what I wanted to say and personal stories. So the form always kind of fit the content that I wanted to tell. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky that the film program that I was in really encouraged personal storytelling and encouraged exploration of whatever forms you desire. Mm-hmm. So I tried them all: animation, fiction, documentary, and stop motion. And I guess going forward, I just kind of took that philosophy of form being applied to the content. Mm-hmm. And even my next film is going to be a 2D animated film, which I've never done before. And I never thought that I would go into that direction. But when I was brainstorming the story that I wanted to tell, there was just absolutely no way that this story could be live action. And so that's usually how things come about. Mm-hmm. And it's scary because I jump into things that maybe I'm not ready for and I don't know, but it's, I guess it just makes it all that more interesting. I used to really love to explore art direction. Mm-hmm. I still do, but I don't see myself going into the path of an art director just because of how much effort and work it actually takes to put pieces together. But I focus a lot of my energy on how the space looks in a film because I want to capture the feeling and the message that I want to say through the space and the pieces and the colors and even what they wear. Although No Crying doesn't seem as art heavy as my other films, it is. The circle table wasn't there, and I was really adamant on having a circular table to bring that collective feeling together. Mm-hmm. There were aspects of what my parents and my sister and what they wore in the film to bring kind of the warmth and the color and the homey feeling together. There were certain aspects of the home that I literally changed, that I changed the wall color to be able to capture that feeling. So I think space for me is very important because even in documentaries, there are certain aspects that you can control to be able to push your message and to further emphasize the feelings that you want to get across. And as a person, I feel like growing up in the same house, I've constantly been seeing the place change, from people dying to changing rooms because people are coming in and out, to renovations and to moving out. So I think what you said about mourning a space is very important to me, and I understand how important spaces are in people's lives and how they root themselves and create meaning and create home through time. So that's very important to me to capture in my films as well.
No, I mean, in watching No Crying, I mean, even outside of the interview, the use of the kitchen specifically is so particular. And the manner in which you very adamantly are an observer during those scenes, we are far away from these sort of daily, like, I mean, these quotidian rituals that just sort of, you know, are always occurring. And the way in which we're able to have that distance in the kitchen and then juxtaposed with the way in which we're confronted by these people we were observing as the interviews happen, it's really striking.
Thank you.
Again, another long-winded written thing here, but I'll try to get into it smoothly. This home is not empty. Every grain of rice, tundra. Films revolving around loss occurring outside of the agency of people. In every grain, you specifically denote a fear that you have for the loss of a cultural tradition being the burden on your shoulders. Now you've made No Crying at the dinner table, where a traditional silence, a generational silence, is confronted and sought an uprooting, where these methodologies under your initiative specifically are to cease. What's more interesting is the contradictory sentiment breathing through your work then. It is very sincere, and in my own considerations of my own cultural background and the relation that I can feel with what you discuss, I don't think I'd know how to approach the idea yet of carrying your history while simultaneously being the one who will change its mechanisms. And so I ask, is filmmaking a tool for you to confront this with? What new fears also have blossomed in the wake of confronting elements you find problematic as the generational torch is passed on?
Totally. I think filmmaking gives you the opportunity to document things in real time. And one of those things are my parents and their stories, and to be able to hear them told in the exact same manner as they would if they were telling it to me again in person. It also allows you to capture spaces as they were and to capture yourself as you were in that time and what you were thinking. I think that for me, whenever I make a film, it's about something I deeply care about at that point in my life. And in some way, if I look at it that way, my whole portfolio is kind of a diary entry from when I was 15 to entering adult life and figuring out how to navigate this burden of carrying culture as I find my first love, as I have children, as my parents meet their grandchildren. So I definitely think that it's a form for me to navigate that. And the fear is immensely how, I don't know, I think there's always fear. Every stage of your life, there's new fears as you grow and you mature. And I think that it's hard to speak of when, you know, you're living it. But there's always new fears and new personal fears for everyone. Yeah.
No, I mean, first, like, I remember, like, the first time I was able to see No Crying was at the top 10 screening. And I remember just walking out, just like being like, I mean, after, like, even after like the shaking of whatever Michael Snow was doing, just thinking very specifically about the ideas that you brought up about, you know, in confronting these fears that are allowed to fester. This ability to actually reconcile with the fact that, especially through your youth and through your formation, there is an attempt to, there is an actual attempt to, seek out an answer for the silence that you've been so afraid of even like looking at or touching, and it becomes almost conditioned. But like the fact that you've made a work to, to articulate the fear of confronting, especially, I mean, in these moments where you cut away from the interview, the moments that we glean of your families are these very, like, especially outside the kitchen, are these very intimate sort of, like, just very vagrant moments. And the sort of the way in which they pass through the passivity, essentially, of that, it's very affecting when tied back in to the root of things, which is to confront. And so I guess the question out of this would move toward the idea of essentially being at ease with fears, and whether you as a filmmaker, as as a person continuing to experience these things and look to maybe even manifest questions that you have in your art, like where do you see, not even do you see, where would you, what further curiosities do you have with it?
Oh, there's always curiosities. There's so many things to explore. In terms of culture, if I were to dive into the same subject, I think there's so many ways and so many angles that you can tell, you can explore a theme. And sometimes when I was younger, especially, I used to be afraid that I would get categorized as being a one-trick pony because I tell the same story. But you never really get white filmmakers getting asked those questions. So I really had to reverse my thinking on that one. But I'm curious for what's going to happen when my parents go to Vietnam for the first time. I'm curious how my children are going to interact with my parents. I'm curious to see how who I choose to get married to will interact with how I pass down culture, and how I'll further assimilate into whoever family and whatever culture their background is. I'm curious to see how collectively the Vietnamese community and the Asian diaspora are gonna innovate and push with their feelings as well, and see how my stories can inspire others to start discussions. But then aside from that, I have my own very universal problems, like how am I gonna adult just having graduated from university,
Of course.
I still have anxieties of if I am going to be able to make it as a filmmaker. And so I'm trying to be able to navigate these and maybe turn them into art. But yeah, there's always something there. Life always throws something at you. Maybe a pandemic,
Maybe. No, I it's very understandable. I mean, like, I'm pretty sure I'm also the exact same age as you and in the same situation. So I'm very aware of the anxieties. But, and I guess I don't want to be so blunt in turning gears, but I guess the last question I really have is specifically about your fiction, because in watching your work, it did stand out as the most sort of particular and peculiar, just in the way in which you approach the work. I mean, Facade specifically is just this very sort of amorphous, symbolic work. Tundra works in a very quiet, natural way until, I mean, we hit that last moment of surrealism, and so ultimately it leans towards this idea of what in your fiction work, in your fiction endeavors that you're thinking about, something I denote is this very heavy, I guess, affinity towards symbolism, and this notion that the interaction with these symbols and the way in which they sort of meld into the lives of your characters, it becomes something completely anew that can only exist in fiction. So I'm curious to your perspective on the symbols that you create.
Yeah, I think I love embedding symbolism in my films because they can always say something, and metaphors as well. They always say something that you can't verbally, or that you can't write in a script. So I always look for ways and meanings to embed in every part of my film if I can. I think it also stems from, especially when I was younger, I didn't know how to express myself. So because of that, I didn't know how to write, especially screenplays. And so I would express it more through visuals and objects and editing. But I think I'm a very observant person in real life. And I see symbols everywhere in your daily life. And I think when you're able to make meaning out of something that you see every day and something that's in your everyday life, you're able to create little stories within your own world and within the film world as well, if you embed those in your script. So yeah, I think that when I feel like when you're able to create meaning and assign meanings within your film world, it just kind of builds more on the thesis that you want to tell. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's all.
And then I want to, I guess, piggyback off of this. The word that I'm hearing you bring up the most specifically is story and storytelling. And I'm curious to how, like, what it is in that word that you find so anchoring, and what you believe are sort of at least the impossibilities that you strive to reach with that word as your core.
Mm-hmm. I read or I listened to something the other day. I don't know if it was an article, a podcast, or a video, but they described storytelling and art in a very intriguing way, which is the only thing that can transport emotions throughout history is storytelling. The only way that you can understand what your grandmother went through is to read a novel. Mm-hmm. Not a textbook, but emotionally a novel, or see a photograph of that place right then. Through a film, understand that person's journey through a day in the life, that particular time, frozen in history. Mm-hmm. And no other job, no other profession or form or medium can do that but art. And I think storytelling is a very, very powerful form of that as well.
Well, I think actually that's an excellent place to end things off. I unfortunately, I would love to go longer, but we do have time limits.
Oh, but thank you, Zach.
Thank you so much, Carol, for joining. And I look forward to everyone having the opportunity to watch No Crying at the Dinner Table.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you very much.